All right. Hey YouTube, how you doing? It's Max. So today, I wanted to make a video about kinks and fetishes, and this is a topic that I I've tried to do this a lot of different ways. I've tried a couple different approaches, and it just doesn't really seem like it hits the points that I'm trying to make it hit. Naturally when you think of like a video of like kinks and fetishes, it's going to be a bit like, I don't know, cringe. And so the point of this video, I guess I just want to preface, isn't really to be cringe. It's might inevitably be just due to topic material, but I wanted to kind of look at this from a I guess more of like an educational and societal benefiting lens. Yeah, it just seems like most of the time I try to come up with a script and this just comes off as like even more cringe. Like I'd rather upload like another video talking about anime girls or abortion or ranking cartoon characters than like this kind of topic. But I think that this is kind of important, so I'm gonna try to give it another go. We'll see how it resonates. But I think like for me, why I kind of perceive this topic as a bit cringe is like growing up, I was always like kind of under the impression that like sexual content, I guess, was this forbidden topic, especially being raised in like a very religious household. I don't really remember we like talked about like sex very often, if at all. And it's just something that even in like society, like I see it like brought up, but there's still like this kind of like taboo-ness to it, especially if it's brought up like unsolicited. It's kind of like a no. So however, like I don't know if this is like the reason why I think this is more like interesting and fascinating, like when something is a bit more taboo or stigmatized, it's like kind of like more intriguing to you. So I don't know if that's kind of it, but I suppose like if you're watching this, then you might also find this kind of stuff interesting or fascinating. Uh, yeah, I guess I'll talk a little bit about like kind of my experiences, not in too much detail. Like I was kind of talking about, I want this to be kind of like a more of a like a just like a general kind of conversation about the points that I'd like to bring up in the future, if that makes sense. Um, but I think like, w- even talking about this in public, I think that I'm like kind of on the fence, because like, while I do think that overall I'd like for the discussion of fetishes and kinks to be normalized, so that we can talk about them more openly. I don't know if this is something that I personally like. I don't want to hear about like people's sexual kinks and fetishes just on the street when I first meet them. Just kind of like how I don't really need to know about people's like sex lives in general. Um, like I think there's like this sweet spot when it comes to like being able to talk about this, and it takes a lot of tact, I think, which is I think humans we're kind of bad communicators. So this is something that I don't really foresee being like a reality soon, but I kind of want to talk about, I guess, the importance of why I think it could be a reality and good to like, kind of be mindful of like people who may be experiencing some of these things. So like, um, I think like when I do see someone talking about their fetishes or kinks, like being able to admit that, I do think that that is something that takes a lot of guts. Think of that person as brave, and I admire their confidence, um, especially when it's like they're able to do it with a lot of tact and precision. Like if we're having a conversation and they're mostly just kind of trying to share information about themselves, not really they're not doing it in a way that's like, oh, look at me, I like this thing. It's more like, they genuinely just want to, share something that is, means is personal to them, and they trust me or something with that information that's very deep. I think that that's something that I kind of admire about some people, is and I think that this is really good in the context of like if you have a partner and like a partner in a relationship, whether it be your boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other, spouse, and you're able to communicate these ideas to each other without any judgment. I think is very critical in a relationship. And it's you know on the like I do think it's like a bit cringe when I guess like when I describe like people who don't really have tact in this, it's like I guess for lack of a better word, like they don't foreplay into the conversation with like, kind of feeling the conversation out and understanding like the tone of the room. Um, it like when you're able to, when you declare your kinks and fetishes kind of unsolicited, like I guess an example might be like someone who has like a bumper sticker or wears a t-shirt, and it's just like out in public, and it's like there might be like kids around or people, and now you're like forcing parents to have to like have these conversations with their kids. I think that that's kind of not as cool or kosher, but if you can really kind of get a grasp of like and read the room, who's in the room, and if the conditions make sense, I think that there's this uh, there's a time and place to talk about this kind of material. And it sort of kind of goes back to that order of operations kind of conversation, similar to the onion layer model video, where you kind of have to slowly peel back the layers of the person to get to the core rather than like start with the core. So I think that like, I just don't want like my first impression of someone to be what kind of kinks they have in this sort of cry for attention kind of way, if that makes sense. And so I've done some research on kinks and fetishes, and I'm no expert, so I could be wrong in some of this information. But my impression is that there are probably more people who have a kink or fetish, and we just don't really admit that. And I think that when I think about like kinks and fetishes, I think about them as uncontrollable attitudes rather than behaviors. So like if you have like a fetish for like something, it's more of like this uncontrollable attitude. Like it's just what turns them on. They can't really control it. And I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with that. However, I do think that we can control our behaviors. And so I think there's a good distinction here because like uh, if you have like an uncontrollable attitude that like violates someone else's rights or if it's illegal, then I'm on the I don't believe that you have a free pass to or a pass at all to proceed with the behavior of that the dimension of this kind of fetish thing. So like this kind of poses this problem for the person with this uncontrollable behavior, that they need to find a way to cope with this uncontrollable behavior so that it doesn't become an illegal, or sorry, if someone who has an uncontrollable attitude, they have to find a way to control and cope with this uncontrollable attitude so that it does not become a behavior, if that makes sense. So, like, fortunately, I personally don't have any kinks or fetishes that are illegal or that violate someone else's rights. But, I can imagine that someone who does have one of these things, that would be a very, difficult reality to live in, where you crave this fantasy that's harmful and you need to constantly kind of like put reins on it, I guess. And, for me, like, I don't have anything like too crazy of a fetish or kink, but like just being like, as I was kind of talking about earlier, I kind of like admire people who are able to like disclose this information. Um, I don't really feel like comfortable talking about this kind of stuff, except for with my partner. But even then, like, I remember it being this like hurdle to kind of overcome, like mustering up the confidence to tell her. And I remember for me, like if I, am not telling them something like this, then it feels like I'm lying in a way, and I don't want it to be like, I don't want to have this feeling ever that I feel like I'm living this like secret life, if I have this like kind of like uncontrollable attitude that I just can't like reveal. I feel like I need to like confess that kind of stuff. So I couldn't really imagine if I had like a more, I guess I don't know if I want to say like dangerous, but like just something that I guess is illegal or harmful as a fetish. That would be a very difficult thing that I like I can't really imagine it, but I can, I guess, at least imagine that it's difficult to live with, if that makes sense. And so through this research, also, you kind of learn about how these fetishes and kinks kind of develop when we're young and through puberty. And I guess just imagining, like, being a teenager again and, um, what is the best, and this is when we're like the worst communicators, right? And we're trying to, like, be these normal people, but also try to find ourselves. And exploring love and relationships is always like this interesting like challenge and game where it's like, do I want like when is it good to even like kiss someone, right? Like, is it better to kiss someone on the first date or the third date? All those things. So when you reveal these like kind of fetishes, that's usually really far down the line in the relationship, I think, normally, right? And the entire time, I guess, are you thinking of things like, you know, is this all for not this relationship when they finally like realize what my fetish or kink is? Are they going to like, break up with me, kind of thing? And so I imagine that like this kind of, especially the more like crazy the fetish, I imagine that this really has like an effect on a person's like self-esteem, especially when we're younger, but even like when we're older, and I guess I do see our society being a little bit more open and willing to invest resources into these things, like especially when you kind of like think about the mental health implications of this. And I feel like this kind of like, because it kind of has this play on our self-esteem, I think, um, this category kind of, almost deserves like a safe space, I guess, to disclose these uncontrollable desires, whether they're illegal or illegal. But I guess especially if they're ones that are illegal, so that we can, I guess, figure out ways to best cope with them in a uh, way that is socially acceptable, so it doesn't get out of hand. Um, and like as I sort of talked about before, I think that like it should be viewed as okay to have like, an uncontrollable attitude. So even like for like an illegal behavior, I think that kind of normalize like, in again, I want to like very clarify the difference between an attitude versus a behavior where the attitude is, purely just in your head, whereas the behavior is you, fulfilling this and acting upon it. So like the attitude, which is the uncontrollable thought in your head that you're not acting upon, I think that it should be, I guess, viewed to like okay to disclose this kind of stuff. um and I don't know the best way to communicate this, but the reason why I think, is so that these people cannot feel as alienated, like being monsters, I guess. So they will be able to disclose, and this is where it gets challenging because finding the time and place to disclose this stuff, I think that, whether it be like a therapist professional would be an example of a good time to disclose this information, but even to like maybe like close friends or family, to, I guess, help these people, sort of receive help that they may need in, I guess, going on this journey, if that makes sense, of trying to cope with these kinds of extreme fetishes and behaviors or attitudes before they become behaviors. um, and I think that this is also very challenging because we also have to, traverse these kind of gaps of, what can we teach to kids and what can we teach to society without people having, opinions to say, no, I don't want my kid to receive this kind of information or this, because it's sex related. I think there's a lot of hurdles there. People who just kind of are turned off by the idea of sexual education in general, who might try to veto this kind of, education. And this is kind of, I guess, in my opinion, an obstacle in our society. Like, I know this may not seem like the most important issue that, we face today, but I guess it's just something that I kind of think about because of how I was raised, and just how I've feel like I've kind of been conditioned to think of sex and stuff as this taboo thing that you just like should never talk about. So I guess it's just more of like something that I think is interesting more so than I think it being like the most important issue in the world. But I do think that like um not treating people who have these uncontrollable attitudes as these creepy monsters and trying to find legal and normalized outlets for these people to cope with these kinds of things and challenges in their life would overall be a benefit to society. Um, and I'm sorry this isn't like the most detailed or nuanced thing about this topic. It's mostly just like my surface level thoughts and trying to avoid being super cringe on a topic like this. Hopefully, you're finding this somewhat interesting. And like I said, I try to record like many this a couple different ways, um, just to kind of how best to approach this. Um, and overall, just trying to be mindful of like how it could be interpreted. And I'm just as another disclaimer, I'm not saying that we should legalize illegal fetishes. I guess my hope is just that we can change our cultural perspective around sex related topics overall, for the purposes of combating like mental health and reducing the number of sex crimes in just having these alternative ways that um, you know people don't have to like, I guess, resort to drastic measures to fulfill these desires, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know if this makes sense or not, but feel free to let me know. Hopefully this was not terrible, I guess. Have a good day.